guys, welcome back to the Flourish Birth Vlog. Today we are starting a brand new series where we are talking about common concerns during the labor and delivery process. So a few weeks ago we reached out and we asked you guys, what are your common concerns and anxieties surrounding labor and birth so that we can address them. So we have heard you and we have compiled a list and we're going to start addressing them. So one of the very first ones that we heard was tearing. A lot of moms are really concerned about tearing during delivery. So what does that mean? What does it feel like? What should I be concerned with? So we are going to kind of pull these apart, and the more you learn, the more knowledge that you gain, the less anxious you tend to be about these things. So talking about tearing, let's start.
Yeah, so there's several things that we can talk about when it comes to tearing. Number one, how likely is it that you're going to tear? How big of a deal and how painful is it if you do tear? And then what are some things that you can do and that we as doulas can help you, or your midwives or providers can help you to do to prevent tearing? So there's lots of different things that you can do for that. So the first thing that we'll talk about is like, what does that feel like and how often does it happen? So I know when especially if you're a first-time mom, you've never given birth yet, the thought of that area tearing sounds really horrific and scary.
Yeah, and very permanent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But after witnessing hundreds of births and seeing the kind of tears women get and the experiences that they have with them, I would say by far and large, the majority of tears that I do see are really small tears, either first or second degree tears that are super easy to fix or don't even need to be fixed at all.
Right.
So if that eases your mind. And when I say most of the tears I see are like first degree tears. And so depending on where you're giving birth, in the hospital they pretty much sew up everything, and that sounds scary as well, but they numb you and you don't feel it, and the healing process is actually a lot easier than it sounds like. In the out-of-hospital setting, it depends on the midwife that you have. I see very many midwives, depending on the kind of first-degree tear, that they won't even suture it, because the thing about vaginas, and we're going to use that word, is that they're made to do this, and they're super vascular, and they are meant to be able to heal themselves.
To stretch and then heal if they tear.
And so those tissues are meant to just come back together, and they will actually just heal themselves right up. So there's many out-of-hospital midwives that I see that if it's a minor first-degree tear, they don't even feel the need to do any suturing because of how well it will heal.
It will heal on its own.
Yeah, and with minimal pain and anything like that.
Right.
And so even with second-degree tears, though, that need to be sutured, if you get sutured by a good birth attendant, you're not going to feel it, and they heal super well with minimal pain. Some of those like more complicated tears, there will be some more pain, but I will say in my 12 years of doing birth work, I've only seen maybe like 1 or 2 tears like that, and it was in like very complicated birth situations. So I hope that eases your mind about how often people tear. And so often I see people with no tearing at all, because like I said, our bodies are meant to push their babies out. Yeah. And so the second question is, what can we do to help prevent tearing in the first place? Or how does it feel when you tear? You want to say something about that?
Yeah, so I actually did tear with my first 2. The first, Jackson, was by far the worst. He was a pretty severe second degree is what they told me. But again, you don't feel that in the moment when you're pushing your baby out. It's not like you can feel that happening. After we delivered him, I was so busy bonding with baby, I wasn't even paying attention to what they were doing. They numbed me and then took care of it. I was sore for a couple of days afterwards, but it heals. It goes back to completely normal. There is no long-term issues that anyone has to worry about when something like that happens. And then with Jude, I tore again, but a little bit less, and I still needed some stitching, but it wasn't that bad. And I think I think you also learn to not overexert yourself. I think my recovery and my pain was higher with Jackson simply because I didn't slow down the way I should have.
Which we're supposed to do anyway.
Which you're supposed to do anyway, for
Yeah.
sure. So, and then with Asher, I learned one of the great techniques for helping reduce your risk of tearing is to breathe baby down versus pushing. So when you get to that stage where pushing takes over, sometimes it's like this very strong urge to push, and your body wants to just kind of bear down and do it. If you know that you are prone to tearing, I purposefully practiced breathing down. So instead of pushing, I just push my air out.
Yeah.
Instead, just practice doing that instead of
Yeah.
letting the energy come out this way instead of this
That's
way.
especially helpful if you also have really fast pushing stages, as
Like I do, right.
as you do. So actually, the slower your pushing stage is and the more time your tissues have to stretch, the less likely you are to tear. So
Right.
when you're in that moment, it might not seem like a blessing, but a longer pushing stage and taking it slow actually helps everything to open up really nicely and stretch. Yeah.
And I will say that in this circumstance that I'm talking about with myself personally, each of those pushing stages, especially the last two, were less than 5 minutes. So when you have a mom and she's pushing for an hour, it can be, in those moments, like, oh, is the baby ever going to come here? But it's actually a really good thing. Your body was meant to do it like that so that the tissues can stretch very gently to allow for baby to come out, and then they close without opening too quickly and then tearing.
Yeah. Another helpful thing is to try and work through that fear, because a lot of moms, when they start to feel that pressure, what they do is they actually tense their muscles
They fight it.
against it.
Yeah.
And so that has the baby coming down and then those tissues getting tighter against it, and because you have all this fear, and naturally that would cause things not to stretch as nicely as they would if you know that stretching and that burning sensation is normal and it's good, and it means your baby's almost here. And to really, when you feel that, to release your pelvic floor against it instead of constricting,
Right.
to help everything stretch the way it's supposed to.
Yeah.
So getting rid of fear is really helpful for that.
Another thing that you can do to help reduce tearing is delivering in the water. So having that water helps to soften the tissues a little bit.
And give some counter pressure against it.
Yeah, and it will actually help reduce your risk of tearing, essentially.
Yep. Another thing, I don't see this as much in the hospital setting. It depends on your provider and how they feel about everything. But very often in the out-of-hospital setting, I will suggest at that time when baby's head is starting to show on the outside, for moms to actually reach down and feel themselves. And sometimes in that moment, it seems super scary to do that or super overwhelming to do that.
It is. Yeah.
But because you're kind of in your own head and you're just like, there's so many sensations happening to you. But every time I've looked at a mom and I've said, no, really, reach down.
Try,
You can
yeah.
feel your baby's
Yeah.
head. It's the most magical thing. They reach down and they feel their baby's head, and their face just
Yeah.
lights up and their eyes get so big, and they're like, oh my God, that's my baby
Yeah,
right there.
yeah.
I can feel my baby.
Yeah.
And it gives you this shot of like, I can do this.
Right.
I can finish
I
it.
am doing this.
Yep.
And it also helps them gauge, oh, this is where I am in this.
Yep. So then you can
process.
actually feel with each push, if you keep your hand there, you can actually feel with each push how your baby's coming down. And mamas are naturally made to give themselves that natural counter pressure and not push too fast when they're feeling that sensation with their hand as opposed to just their bottom. So I always suggest that moms, the moms that do it, they love it, and it's a really, really magical moment. Yeah.
It is special. I did not want to do that at all with my first two.
Yeah.
But I purposefully thought, okay, I want to do this with my third to help prevent tearing. And I wanted to catch, really, really bad. And so I was like, well, if I do that, I'm going to have to reach down there to catch him. And so, oh man, it was awesome.
Yeah.
I don't regret it, for sure.
And then the last thing is having providers and talking to them about what they can do to help. If you're not in the water, something that's super helpful is if the provider uses a warm washcloth or arnica oil to actually put counter pressure on your perineum. This helps slow and helps the descent of the baby's head, and gives those tissues time to stretch, and also gives them a little bit of pressure to help prevent tearing. So your provider can do that as well.
Yeah.
So basically, to help get rid of these fears, it's important to know that for the most part, when tearing happens, it's really not as painful as what we imagine. And it heals much better than what we would imagine as well, and our bodies can go back to what they were before, or what they would have been like after birth had we not torn.
Right.
And that that there are ways to prevent it, and one of the best ways to do that is to try and work through those fears. So if it is a fear of yours, don't bury it down, journal about it, talk to your providers about it, talk to your doula about it, and try and work through that so that you can come up with ways to prevent it.
Yeah. All right, guys. I hope that was helpful, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.